Thank you all. I know so many of your names, but not necessarily all of your faces. And I'm really excited to talk about the Environmental Voter Project and why Pittsburgh is so crucially important to us. For those of you who don't know, the Environmental Voter Project works in 19 states. In those 19 states, we probably work in, I don't know, 2,000 cities and towns. In only three of them have we decided that it is so important for us to reach voters that we run door-to-door canvassing campaigns. And one of those three places is Pittsburgh. And you'll see why. You'll see why. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And you're going to hear from me today. You're going to hear from Danielle, and you're going to hear from Emily Church, who is our canvassing coordinator in Pittsburgh. Hi, Emily. But I'm going to start by first just mentioning that Citizens Climate Lobby is graciously co-hosting this evening with us. We love working with CCL, and I just want to thank them. And for any of you who are on the line who are not familiar with CCL's work, boy, should you get familiar with their work. Don't just do stuff with EVP, do stuff with CCL. I'm going to start, because some of you don't know that much about the Environmental Voter Project. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Then we're going to get into why we're canvassing in Pittsburgh and some of our data in Pittsburgh and the canvassing opportunities. So let's start just with EVP. The Environmental Voter Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on that sentence that you see there. We identify environmentalists who don't vote, and then we turn them into better voters. That's it. That's what we do. We find environmentalists who don't vote, and then we turn them into better voters. Now, what that also means, though, is that we don't do a lot of the stuff that many other environmental groups do. For instance, we don't endorse candidates. We don't lobby for particular policies. We don't even, as strange as it might sound, try to convince people to care more about climate or the environment. In fact, a really good way to think about what we do is we're not even in the mind-changing or opinion-changing space at all. In fact, we want to avoid that. Changing people's minds is hard. It's expensive. Instead, what we want to do is change people's behavior. What we want to do is identify the people who care so deeply about climate and other environmental issues that it's their number one concern over all other issues, yet they aren't voting. And so what they need is a behavioral intervention to turn them into better voters. All right, why do we have that unique focus? Well, because one of the biggest reasons we can't get more consistent climate leadership in this country is revealed by some of the data you see in this poll right here. Now, this was a poll taken in the 2022 midterms in battleground states, but I guarantee you it's not that different from any other poll you would see of a presidential election or a little city council race. When you ask people to list what their number one priority is, their number one issue priority, far, far too few of them list climate and the environment. Now, the good news is that 4% number that you see there, well, it used to be 2% not too long ago, and before that, 1%. So it's going up. But there aren't nearly enough voters who list climate and the environment as a top priority. Now, as many of you probably are thinking, lots of voters would prefer government action on climate change. A lot of voters will say, oh, it's important to me, which is great. I don't want to belittle that. But at the end of the day, when people go in to choose a candidate, they only have a few qualities and a few issues that are top of mind. And so one of the big problems we have in the climate movement right now is that not enough voters prioritize climate. Not enough of them think of it as an important or salient issue. And the reason why this is such a big problem is not just because when too few voters prioritize climate, we don't elect enough climate leaders, although certainly that's a problem, but also because of this. One of the most misunderstood or not understood things about modern politics is that whether you vote or not is public record. And it might seem like I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm not, I promise. Stay with me here. Who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not is public record. Now, why is that important to our discussion? Because let's think about how political campaigns work. The first meeting in any political campaign is they all sit down at a table, they open up their laptops like the one I'm looking at right now, and they log on to public voter files. Let's say you're in Pittsburgh. You're going to log on to the voter file and you're going to say, okay, which of these registered voters in Pittsburgh actually bother to vote? Let's say Emily is running for mayor of Pittsburgh and I'm running her campaign. Well, the first things we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, all these people here in the public voter file, they're not even registered. Forget them. Oh, these people here, they are registered, but looks like they don't ever bother to vote. We're probably not going to talk to them either. Oh, these people are registered and they do vote, but only in presidential elections. Oh, these people even vote in midterms. That's not great, but it's a little bit better. Oh, here are the ones who vote in local elections. Okay, yeah, let's talk to them. And not to be too creepy about it, but we literally know who these people are by name and street address. I kid you not. And this goes for every single political campaign out there. They know who is likely to vote in their election and who isn't likely to vote in their election by name and street address. And so whether you are Emily running for mayor or someone running for president, when you have that data available, you better believe that almost all of your money is spent on likely voters, and almost all of your time is spent on likely voters. Maybe your last dollar goes to unlikely voters, but certainly not your first. And again, I want to reiterate, we know people's voting history by name and street address. And so if you're only going to target the likeliest voters, who do you think you're going to bother polling to figure out what issues they care about? Not the non-voters. You're also only going to poll the likely voters. And so that's why polling data like this is so important and such bad news for the climate movement. It's because when you focus on people who list climate and the environment as their number one priority, far, far too few of them list climate and the environment. All right. So why do we at the Environmental Voter Project look at this data and say, okay, we've got a problem, not enough voters list climate and the environment as their top priority. Let's talk to non-voters. Well, for this very good reason. It turns out that so few voters list climate and the environment as a top priority simply because environmentalists aren't voting. In other words, there are plenty of people out there who do list climate and the environment as their top priority. The only problem is when you look at lists of likely voters, people who consistently vote, they don't show up. And they don't show up because we've come to realize that environmentalists are disproportionately awful voters. And so the best way to redress this lack of political power in the electorate is to go and get the ones who are already with us and change their behavior and bring them in. So very quickly, this is one last slide just showing this sort of turnout problem that I'm talking about. In that same poll, that 2022 midterm battleground state poll, look at this. In Nevada, 5% of likely voters said that climate change was the most important factor when choosing a candidate. Okay, it's an okay number, right? 5%. But look at the unlikely voters in Nevada. Look at the people who don't have a history of voting in midterms. 10% of them said climate's the most important factor. Twice as many. There are twice as many of these climate first people in the population of low propensity voters as there are in the population of regular voters in Nevada. Same story in Pennsylvania. 3% of likely midterm voters say this is their number one criteria when choosing a candidate. 7% say that among low propensity voters. This is why we go after all of these voters. And just to give you a big picture number, we believe that 13 million super environmentalists did not vote in the 2022 midterms. Over 8 million skipped the 2020 presidential election. This is how big these numbers are. And I see some of you shaking your heads and you're clearly frustrated, like, why aren't these people voting? And I get it. But I want to suggest to you that this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity because we live in a moment in time where it's become almost impossible to change people's minds. But these people don't need their minds changed. They just need their behavior changed, which isn't easy, but it is easier and cheaper. So this is why we do what we do at the Environmental Voter Project. And very, very briefly, before we get to some Pittsburgh data, I want to breeze through our approach. And forgive me for not going into more detail here. If you have questions, we're happy to address them towards the end in the Q&A, but we do want to get to what it's like to canvass with us, some of the work that Emily and Danielle have been doing, and some of the opportunities. Very briefly, what we do is a 4-step process. The first is we work with data scientists to build predictive models on these voter files that help us identify who these climate first voters and non-voters are. I realize I just said a mouthful, and some of you might know what predictive models are, and some of you might not. Very briefly, we will poll enormous numbers of people. We'll poll tens of thousands of people, isolate the ones who tell us climate's their top priority, and then figure out if there are other people like them using demographic and behavioral and consumer data. And then we test and retest and refine our models until we're really, really confident that we can isolate all the people who are really likely to list climate as their top priority. Then remember, whether you vote or not is public record. We don't need a data scientist to help us with that part. So we isolate the ones that are low propensity voters, and we go to step 2. We mobilize them. Using behavioral science informed messaging that we test in experiments called randomized control trials, we'll canvass and call and mail and send digital ads to these voters, not to change their minds. Remember, they're already with us. These are people who, like, you shake them awake at night and they're going to scream climate change. Like, they are with us. They're just not voting. So all of our messaging is nonpartisan and it's purely focused on getting them out the door on election day. 3, habit reinforcement. Our ultimate goal is not to win one-off elections. Will that happen sometimes? Sure. But our ultimate goal is to address that problem that I mentioned at the beginning, this lack of political power in the electorate. So when we're in a state, we like to work year-round in every election, big and small, to talk to these voters to improve their voting habits. So that 4, ultimately, we start changing the electorate. And we make it hard for anybody to run for any office without looking at their polling data or looking at their voter files and saying, holy moly, where did all these environmental voters come from? Because when that happens, believe me, politicians start changing their tune. Because nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. They go where the votes are. They either go where the votes are or they don't get to be a politician anymore. It's the brutal arithmetic of how democracy works. Politicians are in the business of collecting votes. So it's up to us to make sure as many of those votes are climate first voters as possible. Very quickly, some of our results. Just over the last 4 years, we've been active in over 1,000 elections. Now, in many of those elections, maybe close to all of them, we increase turnout, but we can't always measure it with absolute certainty. What we do, though, is we submit our work to what's called randomized control trials. So we set aside a control group of these low propensity environmental voters and don't talk to them. And then after the election, compare turnout among the people we spoke to the people we didn't. And as long as those numbers are big enough, sometimes, not always, but sometimes if it's a really big election with lots of voters, we can get what's called statistically significant results, proving what our impact was on turnout while controlling all outside variables, even outside variables like a $1 billion presidential campaign. Because unless they hacked into our system and decided to only talk to people in our treatment group and not our control group, we've controlled for that. And as you can see, just over the last 3.5 years, we have been solely responsible for increasing turnout by as much as 1.8 percentage points in statewide general elections, as much as 3.6 percentage points in statewide primaries, and as much as 5 percentage points in local elections. These might not seem like big numbers, but ask Donald Trump how big a deal 1.8 percentage points is in Pennsylvania. He'll tell you. These are big numbers in the political business. We're very, very proud of them, and many of you have been a part of them. Finally, our ultimate goal, remember, though, is not this election-specific impact. It's our longer-term impact. And since we launched our one-state pilot program in 2015 and 2016 in Massachusetts, we have now communicated with over 9.5 million individual voters, all of whom, by definition, are likely to list climate as their top priority and were unlikely to vote in at least an election, or we wouldn't have been talking to them, right? Well, what we saw as of about 10 months ago, which was the last time we checked this, almost 1.5 million of them had become such consistent voters that they had voted in their most recent federal election, their most recent state election, and even their most recent local election. They had become super voters. That is our ultimate goal. That is our ultimate goal. Now, to be clear, this second metric doesn't have the same scientific precision as the first one, the randomized control trial. I want to be clear that we're not claiming that we are solely responsible for turning 1.5 million non-voters into super voters. In fact, we're not solely responsible for that. But it's still a very important metric for us to be tracking. And this number goes up and up each year. And I can tell you, we may not be solely responsible for this, but we're pretty darn responsible. There's no other organization that was active in over 220 elections last year, in an odd year. No one else is mobilizing voters in all these teeny little elections. All right, I'm going to breeze through the rest of sort of the intro to EVP so that we can get to some Pittsburgh specific stuff. When you look at this cumulative impact that we've had over the past few years, you can see how it stacks up in certain states. So we've helped create over 227,000 environmental supervoters in Pennsylvania. What does that mean in a state like Pennsylvania? Well, it's almost 3 times the margin in the presidential election in Pennsylvania in 2020. It's almost as large as the margin in the US Senate race last year. It's a big number. We've gotten a lot of great press for our work, being featured in all of these outlets that you see here. We've had a lot of really, really nice things said about us, most importantly by our volunteers. That's the stuff we value most. And as I alluded to at the very beginning, even though we are active in 19 states, in those 19 states, we decided we wanted to start. This isn't how we always did door-to-door canvassing, but last year, with Danielle's leadership, we decided it was better to just focus on 3 areas where there are so many of these non-voting environmentalists, so close to each other, in so many canvassable areas, that we just had to work year-round there knocking on doors. One of those places is Tucson, Arizona. One of those places is Austin, Texas. And yes, the other is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are canvassing in Pittsburgh because of all of our 19 states and all of the cities in those states. It was one of the 3 most obvious places where we could go door to door and turn non-voting environmentalists into super voters. And that's why we're talking to you right now. This is crucially important to all of our work. Just since 2018, so we expanded into Pennsylvania in 2017, but we didn't start mobilizing voters in Pittsburgh until 2018, just because of the way the election calendar went. We have been active in 23 different elections. 23. 10 local elections, 7 statewide primaries, and 6 statewide general elections. Now, this gets back to that habit reinforcement thing that I was talking about before. I won't claim that all 23 of those elections were crucially important for environmental policymaking. In fact, to be honest, many of them weren't. But what they were all important for is changing people's habits. If you are in the business of trying to create consistent every election voters, you can't skip an election. Every election is a precious behavioral intervention opportunity. And our approach at EVP is, how dare we let one of them pass us by without using it as an opportunity to talk to these voters. We have also had full conversations with almost 7,300 of these low propensity environmental voters in Pittsburgh over the phone. These aren't just people picking up and saying, no, I don't want to talk to you. These are full conversations. We've sent direct mail, usually multiple pieces over multiple elections, to over 44,000 of these low propensity environmental voters in Pittsburgh. And we've delivered digital ads to over 50,000 of them. Many of these people have now grown out of our contact universe because they're such good voters that it doesn't make sense for us to mobilize them anymore. Some of them are still in our contact universe, but only for particular elections. Maybe they went from being people who never voted to now they vote in presidential elections and midterms. And now we're just working to try to get them to vote in local elections. But for all of these people, we're constantly updating our universes, identifying the low propensity voters that need to have their behavior changed. So I'm going to stop there and let Emily jump in before I come back, because I've told you why it's important that we're focusing on Pittsburgh. I've discussed some of the elections that we've been active in, but Emily has been on the ground leading our canvassing efforts. And before I get into some of the data that we're seeing this year, I'd love it, Emily, if you would just chat about what it's like to canvass for EVP and anything else that you think might be important to share with folks.
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I enjoy canvassing more than the phone banking, and I did a lot of phone banking with EVP before I started canvassing. With the canvassing, it's mostly walking, and the conversations tend to be a little bit more pleasant than with phone banking. I've never had someone like be rude to me while I'm canvassing as I have when I'm phone banking. And that says something because I've been doing a lot of canvassing lately. And I feel like I generally have productive conversations with people. I've also had people tell me that of course, they're going to vote, they vote every time, which is probably not true because they wouldn't be on our list if that were the case. But when I talked to them, it turns out that they had some confusion about when they needed to mail their ballot or something like that. So there was something that was getting in the way of them actually voting as reliably as I thought they were. So that's really rewarding because, in that case, it's someone who like already wants to vote and they think they're voting, but their vote hasn't been counted due to some error on their end that I help fix. So I love doing this work, and I feel like it can really add up. So yeah, thank you, Nathaniel.
No, thank you. Thank you. And I think one thing that really rings true with me about what Emily just said is this isn't like either maybe you've imagined or maybe you've experienced excuse me, with other canvassing operations. Because what we're not asking you to do is change someone's mind. We're not asking you to try to convince someone and twist their arm into voting a certain way or voting for a particular candidate. Often what you're doing is helping them do something that they already want to do. And so this really is, I think, a consistently rewarding experience for our canvassers. And I certainly hope you recognize the importance of it, but I do think that's important to understand. Before I hand it off to Danielle, I just want to finish by looking backward a little bit and then looking forward. Last year, the first year that we launched canvassing in Pittsburgh, thanks to Emily and Danielle's great leadership, we reached over 1,500 of these low propensity environmental voters by canvassing. This year, our goal is 3,000 of them. This is who we want to reach. And it's so important to have these face-to-face conversations because take it from me, someone who has run now probably over 300 randomized control trials, testing the impact of digital ads and direct mail and postcards and phone calls and this, that, and the other thing. The single most effective way to turn a non-voter into a voter is still an old-fashioned, in-person, face-to-face conversation. Period. And I know you don't need me to tell you how important 2024 is, and how important Pennsylvania is, and how important Pittsburgh is to Pennsylvania. These doors will make a difference. And as we look at who we're targeting in Pittsburgh, we're going to be targeting, I believe, well over 40,000 people, maybe close to 50,000 people in Pittsburgh. But 12,624 of them are what we call canvassable. What does this mean? One, they're already registered to vote. Two, remember, we've identified them as environmental voters. What do we mean by that? It means they have a very high likelihood of either listing climate change or clean air, clean water in the environment as their number one priority over all other issues. Three, they are unlikely to vote without a robust, sophisticated campaign mobilizing them to do so. So what does that mean in a presidential election? Well, it pretty much means this. They didn't vote in the last presidential election or any election since then. If that's what we see in their voter file, we kind of need to assume that they are an unlikely voter unless they get nudged to the polls. And then finally, we've determined that they are accessible to door-to-door canvassers. That means they're in a building that has fewer than 14 units. We don't want to go to high rises. And they are listed as walkable in the voter file. Usually that means it's not a gated community or something like that. So these are the voters. Oh, I'm sorry. And I should also say they're really dense together. We don't want to put you anywhere where you're going to have to like walk a quarter mile between every door that you hit. So these are our canvassing targets in Pittsburgh in 2024. 12,624 registered super environmentalists who are unlikely to vote. We need to go get them, and we would love you to be involved in our canvassing operation. And Danielle, I believe, is going to tell you a little bit more about that operation.
Yes, thank you, Nathaniel. I was typing in the chat that a bonus of being in one of our canvassing hubs is that some of those targets that you mentioned, the 12,624, some of those individual voters we don't have phone numbers for. So some of these people, so you have the bonus of being able to have a conversation with. Of course, we could, if we have their address, we can send them mail, but some of these people we just can't reach through phone banking. So through canvassing, you're able to have those face-to-face conversations with, which is, as you mentioned, Nathaniel, and Emily as well, just how important invaluable those conversations are. So moving along, and before I jump into how you can get involved in our work, I really want to thank Emily. So I know we can't all like hear each other clapping, but Emily is doing the on the ground work. She's, leading our volunteers and is the knocking on the 1,500 plus doors last year would not have been possible without her. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Emily, and thank you for being here tonight to share about your experience. So hopefully you'll be able to join Emily if you haven't already in knocking on doors this year. So if you can go to the next slide, please, we'll get into how you can volunteer with us there in Pittsburgh. So as an individual, there are so many ways that you can get involved right away. You can join us for an already scheduled canvas. We have 4 canvases scheduled between now and the April primary, which we're going to get into in just a minute. But just to paint a picture of what canvassing with us looks like, you'll meet up with Emily, your volunteer leader, at a designated location. She will provide you with a full training on minivan, and which you'll use on your phone, and the script that we'll provide you with so that you feel comfortable and you'll feel ready to talk with voters. And then once you feel good, you'll go out for door-to-door canvassing to talk with our target voters about the upcoming 2024 elections. And again, I want to reiterate that we provide a full script, so you have all the information and talking points and deadlines and dates and all of that you need in order to provide the right information with the voter or to the voter. One thing I do want to mention, if you're typically not available on the weekends or you'd rather canvass on your own time, let me know. Let us know so that we can try and work something out. This is something where we didn't really do much last year, but it's something that we're going to try to accommodate if there's interest, just because as we were talking about earlier with this Saturday, we were going to have a group canvas. In case you didn't get that email, this Saturday's canvas has been rescheduled to next Saturday. We'll get into that in a couple minutes as well. But because of that, I'm seeing a need for, there are more and more unexpected nice days. Like here in Austin, yesterday it was 18 degrees in the morning and today it was 72. So, it would have been a great day for canvassing. And for people who have flexible schedules and are interested in canvassing on their own time, we might see if we can make something like that happen across our canvassing hubs. So if you're learning more about canvassing, getting to know that it is a face-to-face in-person thing, and if that's not sounding like the right fit for you, we also do phone banking, and with phone banking, you can call our environmental voters from anywhere, including your home. So again, with phone banking, we provide a full training and a script. So if you're nervous about talking with voters, if this is brand new to you, and you want to kind of do a test trial, this might be the right option for you. It's an easy starting point, and a gradual, after you try phone banking and you realize, oh, our targets aren't so scary, maybe then you try canvassing. Or another option, if you are an organizer and you have a community network that you'd like us to present to, we can, give this kind of information to you or your group. Let us know. Just be sure to take down my email if you don't already have it in your email inbox. It's right there in the bottom left corner of the screen. And I do want to mention that you're welcome to share this recording of this presentation. We'll send out a link to it tomorrow, but so yeah, feel free to share a recording of this with anyone who's interested. So say you are affiliated with an organization like CCL. We've already done some of this with CCL, but if you are affiliated with another group or multiple groups, this might be of interest to you. So of course, you and your organization can join us for any of the things that I've already mentioned, but we also offer voter analysis data or even the opportunity to partner for canvassing events, much like we've been doing with CCL Pittsburgh. And as a partner, you could even put your own spin on it. I want to give it a shout out to Tucson, Arizona. We partner with Tucson Audubon Society, and they actually offer to lead volunteers in birding before the canvases. So, excuse me, it's a super fun way to start the day and meet your fellow volunteers. And it doesn't have to be birding. You don't have to do this at all, like no pressure, but you could do anything. Like if you are interested in leading, your volunteers in gardening or, planting something or painting or whatever. I mean, we're open to ideas if that's something that you're interested in doing. Also, as an organization, if you have any relevant events that are kind of aligned with EVP and what we're doing, we're happy to help promote those events. Or if you have something else in mind that we haven't yet talked about, I'm happy to meet with you and we can discuss potential ways that we can collaborate. Again, my email's right there, so feel free to reach out at any point. And then, yeah, next slide, please, if we can get more into the details of the upcoming 4 canvases. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. Can we take it back? I forgot a very important thing that I wanted to mention. If you're interested in being an Emily, taking on more of a leadership role with canvassing, and of course, this can be after, if you're new to canvassing with us, you can just keep this in mind if you decide like, oh yeah, I can handle being a leadership or a leader with this. Maybe you want to be a volunteer canvas leader. It's a lot of fun. You can talk with Emily. I'm sure she'd be happy to share the info about it, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great way to get to know your fellow volunteers and people who are interested in the same mission as you. And it's a great way to gain leadership skills. And yeah, so I highly recommend it if you're interested. Again, feel free to reach out if that's something that you decide you're interested in either now or after canvassing a few times. Just let me know. So now next slide, thank you. We're gonna get into those 4 canvases that I mentioned. The next one being not this Saturday like we originally planned, but the next Saturday. It should be quite a bit warmer. And we're gonna be canvassing in the Lawrenceville area. So we'll meet at Arsenal Park and you can sign up at any of these links, which I'll share in the chat in just a little bit so you can go directly to those pages. And then on the next canvas will be February 24th. We'll be in the Squirrel Hill area, meeting at Frick Park. And then we'll also be canvassing March 9th and April 13th. Hopefully much warmer by April. And so these are going to be our canvases, all of our canvases before the April primary. But if you have any suggestions for where we should canvass for March and April, we're open to suggestions. We can't guarantee it just because we will need to check the density in those areas, but if there's particular interest in a location, just let us know and we're happy to take a look. So next slide. There's my email just one last time. Feel free to screenshot or write it down or whatever you got to do in order to make sure that you know how to reach me if you need to. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for being here, for spending it is Thursday evening. I almost said Wednesday. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you again to Emily and to all of our CCL partners for making this work possible in Pittsburgh.